I hope you're having a good conference. Let's continue to bash this topic to death, which is modularity, but it's because I personally think, and I've been driving this idea in Liferay for several years now, and we're finally making significant progress, but I think it's really important for a whole lot of reasons, and I'm going to talk about the what's and the hows and the whys today. So this is my outline. I'm going to go how it was, as it is now, and as it shall be, and then we're going to close. So I hope you really like my hand-drawn little diagrams there. I was going to say my kids drew them, but they actually draw much better than I do. So Liferay is, and we've heard this word a lot today, particularly, it's a big monolith. And if you see the lines inside the circle here, there's no clear separation between any of its innards. So everything's tightly coupled. We have no clear boundaries, and what you get is an all or nothing piece of functionality, a product. And so we have been traditionally at the mercy of the app server because our plugin mechanism was built on a Java EE specifications. It meant that we had to rely on what the app server provided in order to do some life cycle-y things, installation, deployment, and so on. We tried to, wedge our way into that behavior, but it was always very limited, and it meant it created all kinds of issues for us. And so our plugins were peers to our own application. And if you're familiar at all with the Java EE specs for web applications, there's actually specs in place and rules in place that are meant to isolate one web application from another. So we had to actually jump through tons of hoops to break that in order to be able to have this interaction. And so we had all kinds of things like startup order issues, dependency issues, security issues, all of which we tried to address on our own. So how did we manage to get this communication to work? We basically took a whole bunch of code and shoved it up into the app server. So that is the part where whenever you're deploying Liferay, whenever you're installing Liferay in your app server, you have to take all these jars and push them into the global or shared class path of the app server. And so this all of a sudden made us subject to all of these app server idiosyncrasies, all these differences, and so we had to have contingent code that would behave one way in Tomcat, behave a different way in Jetty, behave a different way in JBoss, Glassfish, and so on for every single type of app server that we supported. And what we had to do then is, by pushing a whole bunch of code, we suddenly had to protect ourselves from the outside world, and there was no mechanism in place to do this, so we had to use a whole bunch of indirection. So if we wanted to provide an XML API that was standard across all of our plugins, we couldn't expose our choice of XML implementation globally because that would blow up all of the other web apps in the system. So we had to write a wrapper API, expose that globally, do some hacky wiring to connect those two together, and then expose those as static singletons for you to use in your own applications, which bound you strictly to our APIs and our way of wiring things together. And that became very, very difficult over time to manage. Use of statics is like the norm in Liferay. And if you go outside of Liferay, statics is a real dirty word in software development, particularly in Java. You really don't want to do that by in a normal way. So software engineers coming to Liferay, they frown upon this and they would rather not do it. So we're trying to take back control, and this is what we're doing now. So as it is, we're taking back control. We decided to take a different approach than to go through the app server and through this bridge that we had created. We decided the only way to be able to not be at the mercy of the app server anymore is to actually create a child container that we fully control. Some environment where we are not restricted or limited to any of the behaviors that our plugins will be exposed to. And we would completely control this. And so we created a child container, an OSGI framework that runs as a child of Liferay. So the Liferay web app goes through the normal web application initialization phase and then creates this OSGI container as a child. And bootstraps a whole bunch of functionality from there. So on top of that, all our plugins are severely tied to the servlet APIs, the web application APIs, filters, servlets, portlets. You have the HTTP request, you have the response, and so we can't break all of this. So this led to the need to have this emulation layer inside of our container so that we can emulate parts of what the app server was doing, such as taking your web application, initializing its servlets, its filters, and all of its objects in this way. So, on the other hand, we also don't want to turn our backs on all of the work that you have all done, that our community has created. Liferay has been around for more than a decade now. There's an immense amount of software that's been written, and we certainly didn't want to be in a position, or put you in a position where we would say, this version of Liferay is no longer compatible with all of that work that you've done. And so we wanted to make sure that we could say your legacy plugins and the way that they were built to date would still work in this new way. So we had to make sure we would do things like automatically convert your plugins so that they would still behave exactly as they did before, but inside of our container that we control. And this is what we call WAB. There's actually an OSGI spec for this, and I won't get into details because it's not necessary. So other things we had to do is like provide JSP support, for instance, completely inside of our OSGI runtime. But while we're doing this, we had the opportunity to even enhance the process, because now it's not anything that's going to be subject to the app server. We have complete control, so we can actually do some enhancements to your legacy plugins so that you can start to consume them in a different way. So let's say you have a service builder portlet or plugin, or any plugin that supported service builder, and you had these services, these Liferay services inside, and you want to reuse them. The traditional way was all this jar copying and this proxy class loading stuff that happened, and it was very awkward, and you had to move jars around. But now, all we're going to do is automatically wire those as OSGI services for you, and you eliminate jar copying, eliminate duplication completely. And if you had another consumer that uses this service, it can get it as an OSGI service, and you're done. Again, we'll eliminate the jar copying that we used to have to do. We used to shove a whole bunch of jars into your web application. And then, how do we tear down the walls that we had created for ourselves? We used to have well over 100 different types of individually written code for registration of integration points, I guess is what we call them. So if you had an indexer, if there was an indexer API and you implemented an indexer, there was a whole bunch of code written for the initialization, registration, and destruction of those registries. So we had all of this code strewn all over Liferay to do all of these different registration and integration points, and it led to a ton of maintenance. Every time we wanted to do a new integration point, we had to write a whole bunch of code. We had to write all these hook points. We had to change XML DTDs. We had to, make it a public API, and it was extremely tedious and very frustrating for our developers because they were extremely limited. And if you've been at the content targeting talks, you can see how OSGI, once you break that boundary down, it really opens up the doors for our developers. So we greatly simplified the integration point logic through using OSGI service registry paradigm. So as in the little drawing here, you can see that between Liferay itself and its child OSGI container, there's this green registry adapter layer, which says Liferay can register and track services, and it can also publish them into the registry and use them and consume them as well. So we can also consume these integration points through the OSGI services. And this really simplified things. It opened the door for more integration. It allowed us to say, oh, all of these integration points which were previously only available through EXT, not a problem anymore. You can now reach them from inside the OSGI container and never have to build an EXT for that particular case. And we can replace these integration points, or we can provide to these integration points from anywhere, including in your legacy plugins. And this is really a nice functionality. So the next phase was, okay, once we had this emulation layer, once we had this backwards compatibility part, once we had these integration points, we started to tear down the innards of Liferay, which meant a lot of refactoring and a lot of work. Which should be relatively transparent to you. It just meant that we're tearing the pieces of Liferay out and we're putting them inside the OSGI container, and now they're much smaller, simpler, consumable pieces. And so at some point, it meant that Liferay is getting smaller. We just took a big chunk off of it. And as we move forward, that outer piece is continuing to become smaller and smaller and smaller, and more of the functionality is moving into the container. This means a smaller memory footprint when you're not consuming those functions, because you can completely remove them out of Liferay. If you don't use the Hello World portlet, which you're not 100% sure that you're not using this in production, uninstall it. It doesn't need to be disabled or turned off in any way. Just literally remove the jar file. It will not be deployed. It also increased reuse and proper use of functionality between bundles, because now they're using proper interfaces and communications between them, and have a much simpler coupling and sharing model. And it's much easier to configure all of this. So just before, I'm going to go do hopefully have time to do a little demo here, and we're going to get down and dirty with Liferay modules. Monoliths are really hard to maintain. And we've been struggling with this for, well, pretty much ever since we had to build our first support teams at Liferay. At least I personally felt that we were overwhelming ourselves by not really solving the problems that we had. And so we continued to make things more to increase the complexity. And whenever you increase the complexity, it's never a linear thing. It's always seems to have an exponential curve of whenever you add more complexity. It's not a linear function. So modularity promotes isolation. It promotes innovation. So at some point, we really understood, or we realized, okay, our productivity is going to go down immensely for a while, for a significant while. But once we reach that a certain threshold, we're going to change trajectories in the opposite direction, and our innovation is going to begin to increase, and we're actually going to surpass the previous trajectories that we would ever have been able to achieve. And again, this is demonstrated by the content targeting team, who have been able to, in a very, very, very small amount of time compared to all of the other Liferay features, build a really huge, rich set of functionality that has evolved very quickly and will continue to evolve very quickly. And this is only good for you. So we're doing, and Liferay is doing, everything it possibly can to increase not only our productivity, but your productivity. We're doing everything we can to reduce production costs and maintenance costs for you and us. And really fundamentally, the key is just to get out of your way as much as we can so you can get to building the things that you need to build. That's really the key here. So thank you. I'm just going to do a little bit of a demo. I want to just show how this actually looks. So I think you've seen, excuse me, my voice is a little raw from some Madonna yesterday, I think. So you've seen this in other talks. I believe it's been mentioned that inside the source tree of Liferay, and at this point we're going to get pretty technical, so we have this subfolder. It's called modules, and everything in here, or I would say 90% of the things in here are OSGI modules. Now I want to make one thing really, really clear. We're not trying to just adopt OSGI for the sake of OSGI. We are modularizing our platform. That's what we're doing. OSGI is simply a vehicle. If in a few years a new modular or a better module technology comes around, if Java 9 comes out with its new module technology and it's immensely superior, it shouldn't be a very difficult move for us to adopt a new thing. Now, I don't think this is going to happen, because I think OSGI will be around for a very long time, but I really, really, really want to stress the fact that we're not trying to adopt OSGI for the sake of OSGI. That's not the goal. We're just trying to modularize Liferay, because modular applications, modular infrastructures are always easier to understand. They do bring a certain level of complexity, but they're much easier to maintain. And you can look through the entire history of computer science to identify this. In fact, you can look at every other industry in the world and realize that they build things traditionally in a modular way. Automobiles, toy industries, computers, everything is modular in the world. And so we're just trying to adopt modularity with Liferay. Even your enterprises, even your companies are modular by the fact that they have departments and they have, typically well-defined communications between one department and another department. Please fill out this form to make a, get this room or register for this event or whatnot. So we want to do the same thing. So inside this folder, we have all these OSGI modules, and it's broken up into a couple of different categories. And there's a category here called portal, and inside the portal is really the infrastructure pieces that we had to add in order to implement the functionality. We had to implement some HTTP stuff, we had to implement some JSON web service stuff, we had to do some logging, we had to create portlet adaption, we implemented our search engines, we made a JSP compiler adapter, and so on and so forth. All of this infrastructure, and this is what we've been spending a considerable amount of time on for probably the past at least a year after we finished the prototype to prove that OSGI was actually going to be a feasible model. But once we had 95% of that functionality done, we began to tackle the actual pieces of Liferay that we wanted to remove. And we started with a whole bunch of small portlets, and this was like the proof of concept, or the actual, are we doing this correctly? What is the proper model? And so we started, and we proceeded. We tackled this from two directions. One team would tackle the really simple stuff, and they would be able to iterate quickly, and another team would tackle it from the really complex stuff. It might go a little bit more slowly, but from both ends of the spectrum, we would iron out the issues that we would find. And what has this given us? I just want to show you a really cool thing here. If I can get this to do what I want it to do. I'm going to go. So I have a running Liferay instance here. And I'm going to telnet into Liferay. This sounds weird, but I'm actually going to do that. So I've just telnetted into Liferay. So here's another beautiful thing that OSGI gave us. There's a whole bunch of libraries out in the industry that implement functionality. And by having OSGI, we just inherited that magically. So we didn't write this telnet shell. We didn't write this functionality here. We just adopted it. It's actually implemented by the Apache Felix project, and we got it for free. So now I can actually interact with the system and see what's installed. I have all of these bundles installed, and I can see their state. I can turn them on and off. I can install stuff. I can uninstall stuff, and so on. But at the same time, by using these well-defined and properly, by building things in a certain way where we follow particular design paradigms and a particular type of contract, we added a whole bunch of resiliency into our product. So I'm just going to go to my browser and show you that I actually have a running system here. I'm going to refresh the page, and I have Liferay, and I'm going to log in, and I'm going to show you just a very simple portlet that is an OSGI portlet. It's our XSL content portlet. Some of you may have used it to do some light integration stuff. This thing uses JSP, does XML parsing, and that's literally just the demo code that comes with it. So it did its job. It's working inside of OSGI. Now I'm going to do something really, really crazy here. I'm going to open a folder where I have deployed. So here I have my Tomcat instance is actually 7042 here, but then I have this folder, and inside this folder, this is my OSGI runtime folders where all the state in modules are contained. And I'm going to go inside the, is this the one? Yeah, I'm going to go inside the portal folder. I'm going to do something crazy. I'm going to delete. And then I'm going to go to my other folder here. Actually, I'm going to go to my Eclipse, which is here. And I'm going to show you the log. Okay, so all this stuff happened here. And all this stuff got just deleted. A lot of stuff. Unregistered. Okay, it's all gone. Let's scroll back down. Then I'm going to go back to the Liferay here, and I'm going to just hit the page now. I mean, if you did this at any other point in time, Liferay would have just colossally exploded on you, and it would have, been the end of your existence, and your admins would be going, "What is going on?" and all of this stuff, right? So, don't do this in production, please. But what I'm trying to say is that we've introduced actually much more resiliency into the system. We identified how things work, how they should connect to each other. There's clear separation. There's clear communication between all of these modules. There's no ordering necessary between them. They don't have to be started up in a particular order or anything like this. And I can prove this to you if I go now to, I'm almost out of time, but I'm going to go to the folder. I'm going to do ant deploy. This is just redeploying all those modules. I'm going to quickly switch back over to Eclipse here. And in a moment, I'm just going to clear I'm crossing my fingers. This could be a complete blue screen of death thing. It's going to happen. Okay, here we go. So all these modules are going to start redeploying. There's no ordering concern here. One doesn't have to start before another because of building things in a proper way, building things with a proper contract, following best practices for how you should do things in OSGI. I know you, if you've ever used OSGI in any way, you probably remember early Eclipse when there was all these weird things going on. and start order and all these things. Oh my goodness. There's the blue screen that I was afraid of. Oh, no, it's still going. So it's Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is still a little wonky. But again, it's a beta, it's a work in progress. So, but we have gained a huge amount of ability to move, to develop things in a much more resilient way. So we want to be able to do things like provide you bug fixes and patches while you're hot, while your system is live without any downtime. Of course, and one thing I want to make clear is a lot of developers have concern of, oh, what if I'm in the middle of a transaction and I'm going to do this update and the service goes away. That is not the goal of OSGI's dynamicity. Dynamicity in your system is not so that your system administrator or your CEO can log into the admin console and say, oh, I really like this new plugin, and install it during production, and boom, you get a severe crash. We don't expect you to do this. That's not what we're shooting for. We still expect you to, if you're going to make change to your systems, you're going to do this during a maintenance window, but it just means that you're going to be able to keep hot systems around and start restarting entire clusters and starting from a cold state. That's the goal. So I think I'm pretty much out of time, but I'd love to hear any questions that you have. Right behind you, Dennis.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, now we can.
If I install a wrong module, a wrong version, can I revert to previous one?
Can you please repeat that?
If I install a new version, can I roll back to the previous one?
Of course, yes, you can. Yeah. Unless, okay, here's the thing. If you've rewritten the database tables that are connected to that thing, then, that's not magic, right?
Okay.
But if you've just updated a library and you realize you have a bug you never thought might occur, definitely just roll back your library. There's no issue with only one direction upgrades, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
I have one more question.
Right here.
Does this mean that Portlet plugins will run within the OSGI container as well? Because, of course, the spec is severely tied to the servlet spec, and you might get into some issues there.
Okay, so portlets. So we have created an extension to the portlet. I guess it's not an extension to the portlet spec, but it's a customization for Liferay, which turns portlets into OSGI services. However, we're working with IBM and Adobe, who are both big members of the portlet specification, to create an OSGI portlet spec. We've already started the process because we do want to make sure we follow standards. We're still following the standards in the sense that the objects that the portlets expect to be there are still the same objects, so you still have access to all the lifecycle parts. They still behave all in the same way. The request pipeline is no different, and so the only part that is different is the configuration part and how those different pieces connect together.
Okay, cool.
Sorry for the excellent topic.
Okay. Thank you.